So I'd now like to introduce our next presenter, Dr. Isabel B. Franco, who's a Research Fellow at Australian Institute of Business and Economics. Speaking on a topic of sustainable business models, the role of the industry in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Dr. Isabel is a leading expert on international sustainable development, sustainability science, policy and practice. She's passionate about helping corporations action the United Nations UN SDGs into the business strategy. She does this through the development, refinement and application of sustainability assessment tools, methods, models and techniques. Isabel has applied such tools to various industries, namely mining industry, gemstones, higher education, finance and banking, public sector, international development, fashion and the third sector. In geographical contexts as diverse as Australia, Japan, China, Thailand, Colombia, Chile, Bolivia, Peru, Zambia, and Angola. Wow, I'm exhausted. Well, over to you. Thank you.
Well, Jackson, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you to everyone who's attending this conference. With this conference, I would like to acknowledge that more than ever, global issues are impacting local context, and my presentation is going to show you how this global agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, is having an impact more than ever on operations and business operations and on our daily lives. Let's see. Okay. So as Jackson mentioned before, I'm a research fellow at the University of Queensland at the Australian Institute for Business and Economics. I'm also an advisor for the United Nations. I've been working on various locations, most countries, from Africa to Asia Pacific to Latin America. I'm still advising for the United Nations. I'm collaborating with them on corporate sustainability issues. And today's presentation is mainly I'm sharing some research findings, some policy relevant research that we have conducted in collaboration with UN colleagues. So this is basically the outline of the presentation. I'm going to give you a bit of background. Why we are talking about sustainable business models and what are the implications or connections with the Sustainable Development Goals. What is the current scenario, how we can achieve the SDGs, or how we can use a business model to achieve the SDGs, what are the corporate benefits, and then I'm going to briefly explain the model that we developed. This is a model that is under development, right? So this is the second version of our model. Before we publish a book with the first version, this is the second version, and it's contained on a book that I'll show you the cover. If you're interested in the book, you can send me an email at connect@isabelfranco.com. I'll give you my details at the very end. Then I'm going to go through each one of the elements of the components of this business model. And at the end, some recommendations how we can better integrate this into the business and business operations. So as I said before, this is the book that contains the content that I'm presenting today. Obviously, I'm going to be very brief, but this is a manuscript that is quite dense, and I tried my best to just put everything in this single presentation. You can find more about the book. As I said, you can email me or you can Google it as well. You can find some breaks of the book online. So what is the background? There is something called the Sustainable Development Goals. In previous presentations, some of the speakers, they talk about the goals. There are issues that are connected to those goals specifically. The Sustainable Development Goals is simply a global roadmap, a global agenda to achieve sustainable development by 2030. So there are a few issues at the moment, for example, in terms of poverty with Sustainable Development Goal number 1. There are issues in terms of livelihood strategies and food security. We see that in the resource sector, in which, for example, mining operations or mining companies threatens, the mining industry threatens agriculture-based livelihoods, for example. That's very common in developing resource regions. But however, I did some research in Emerald and those mining towns of the North Queensland, and I found that there are quite a few issues in terms of governance, for example, that are quite similar to developing locations in which I've also undertaken research. Sustainable development goal number 3, 20% of the total diseases are linked to environmental risks, and that's very true. Again, we're especially in those locations in which disruptive industries operate. And with sustainable development number 12, responsible consumption and production, there is a plethora of international mandates, of international principles and regulations. But what we found, for example, in a piece of research that we also developed in collaboration with the UNESCAP, the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, we found that out of 100% of the companies that we review in Asia Pacific, only 2% actually report effectively against those international principles. So there is an issue. SDG number 16 on peace, justice, and institutions, strong institutions. There is still issues. There are still issues in terms of trafficking, human trafficking, modern slavery, and that happens a lot. For example, in the gemstone industry, where you see this beautiful jewelry, but I think what happens at the very beginning of the supply chain, those come from like very underdeveloped regions in Africa, where there is a lot of modern slavery. So these are issues that are linked to the Sustainable Development Goals. That's why these are so relevant and so important, because I mean they are integrated somehow. They're being integrated. They are connected with business operations and our daily lives as well. So as on the other hand, what is happening is that businesses are acknowledging the Sustainable Development Goals. They know that there is something they have to be accountable for, and they are somehow implementing some SDGs-related activities. Consumers are aware of the SDGs. As one of the presenters earlier, Elizabeth, she mentioned, consumers are more educated, and they are more interested in purchasing something that brings added value, something that is environmental sustainable, social sustainable. Business and consumers, they believe that governments, they have a primary responsibility in achieving the SDGs, but at the end what research has found is that is the responsibility of 3 key actors, right? It's the private sector, the government, and civil society organizations. And the major issue what we have found in our research is that business lack specific objectives and tools to achieve the SDGs. That's why you came up with this model that I'll show you later on. Corporate accountability and SDGs is increasing, and I give you an example. This benefits all different stakeholders across the supply chain. And for example, with suppliers, there is increasing revenue. This revenue growth is one of the benefits. They are able to identify business opportunities in the locations they operate. Risk management, there is reduced risk management across the supply chain, access to capital, and cost saving and efficiency. How to achieve the SDGs? Well, this is what we find in our research, and there are some organizations that have come up with this, like 5-step methodology to achieve the SDGs. Is first having a better understanding of the SDGs, then defining priorities for the SDGs activities. I mean, the issue sometimes that we find is that many companies, they don't link the SDGs with the core business, right? If the core business is education, so why don't we target, for example, SDG number 4, which is quality education, right? So they target all SDGs, or they target SDGs that are not relevant for the core business. Then defining, setting goals for the SDGs. So we already have priorities, and we need to define and set up goals and integrate those activities, SDGs activities, into business operations. Finally, reporting and communicating. And in this number five, I mean, as I said, there is a plethora of agendas and international reporting mechanisms that they can adopt. GRI, PDAC, ICMA. For the resource sector, there are quite a few, UN Global Compact, among others. What are the benefits of applying this model that I'm about to introduce you? Well, there are quite a few benefits. Brand differentiation. So we have found that companies, they position themselves more competitive, among others. Customer engagement, employee engagement, risk reduction, not only business reduction, but also social and reputational capital reduction. And I'll give you an example of a Canadian company that was operating in Latin America, why reputational capital is so important. So this mining company started explorations for 5 years, and after 5 years, they were about to start operations. So they were exploring. It was the first stage of the mining life cycle. And after 5 years, they were ready to start operations, and they were denied a social license to operate. They have to go back to Canada, and they lost massive dollars in investment. Now they're in dispute with the government because they already had a license, but still they lack the social license to operate. They rebranded, but still they should persist. So that's why it's so important. Another benefit is cost reduction, innovation, positive risk culture, creating value and competitive advantage. So this is the model, very basic. So the foundation, as you see, it has 5 components. So the first component is the foundation, which is the Sustainable Development Goals. We have 3 key components: principles, practices, enablers. And in the literature, our research found that the connection, the interaction among those 4 components can create a sustainable business ecosystem. So let's start with the foundation, which is the Sustainable Development Goals. As I said, this is a roadmap, a global roadmap to address local issues, and this is the baseline of this model. There might be some companies they might know want to follow the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, you can pretty much play with the components of this model. I mean, you can set as the foundation the goals or the objectives of the organization instead of the SDGs. Principles. So we have found in our research that there are key 3 teams at the moment. There are a few now. We are still, as I said, this is the second version of this model. We are about to release the 3rd version at the end of this year, hopefully. So those principles that are working for some companies are corporate governance as the set of tools and regulations that they have to implement, for example, CSR activities or any other set of principles at the corporate level. Research on the literature shows that corporate governance and corporate social responsibility can lead to corporate sustainability as such. Some of the practices that some companies apply to not only address to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, but CSR objectives and sustainability objectives as such are corporate philanthropy, socially responsible investment, and investing in social enterprise. So we have found in the literature as well that the practice with least positive impact is corporate philanthropy. So many companies still have that reactive approach to CSR, and that's causing problems, right? So in the resource sector, for example, in one of my papers, the piece of research shows that you have to plan, and in mining companies particularly, they have to plan from early stages. They have to plan not only for business, for mining operations, but also for the community and the environment since early stages. So that reactive approach to corporate philanthropy is not working anymore. Social responsible investing, as some of the previous speakers, they show the impacts, the benefits of social responsible investment in social enterprise. We have seen cases, and we have documented cases in our research on how empowering, for example, women in social enterprises led by women, particularly in developing locations, has increased, has created greater impact not only for the company but also for the community itself. Enablers. So we have identified these enablers. So there are 6 enablers. Technology is one of those. Innovation, the way the company can introduce not only technology but new ideas and interact with different stakeholders to come up with new products, and particularly sustainable-based products. Interconnectivity, metrics, and in metrics, I mean, the company itself should have already some metrics in place. If not, we recommend some metrics that are out there, developed by the UN or international organizations such as the OECD, among others. And stakeholder engagement and government support is very important. Have that collaboration with the government, not time aligning with, for example, development plans at the local level, at the state level, or at the national level. According to the literature, the sustainable business, the interaction of these components can create a sustainable business ecosystem, and that's the purpose of this model. As I said before, I mean, you can play with those components and principles. You must say, well, the company might say, well, we have a CSR agenda, but we don't have a corporate governance structure in place, so we have to start from there, right? Or vice versa, we have many rules, internal rules and regulations, but we don't have a CSR component, we don't have a sustainability team, and we need to start working on that. Same as practices. I mean, for some companies, I mean, their business model itself might, corporate social responsible investing could work, for others couldn't, or social enterprise that might say, well, it's not part of our core business, we'd rather try something else, right? But same with enablers, right? What helps the company move forward to achieve the sustainable development goals or achieve sustainable development aspirations as such at the local level or the context they operate within. Recommendations. I mean, one of the key recommendations is just go through the literature. You can revise. This is a policy-relevant research piece, and it's very practical. It's not such scientific. We try to make it more applicable and more understandable for the corporate sector. And some of the recommendations actually that we give on this study is, first of all, is sustainable development goals promotion, right? Come out with products, come out with marketing strategies to promote not only the SDGs, but products, sustainable based products or services, depending on what is the core business of the company again. Corporate governance, adopting the rules and regulations that best are going to help the business and the corporation implement the sustainable development goals inside and outside the organization. And multi-stakeholder engagement, or how the company can collaborate with external stakeholders. They can work with governments, as I said before, aligning, for example, with development plans at the local, state, and national level, how they can collaborate with civil society organizations, for example, in the development of social enterprises. Corporate disclosure, adopting the best framework and the best international principles or regulatory mechanisms that's going to allow the company to communicate what is happening internally and externally and be accountable for the actions of the corporate level. And corporate sustainability, again, be aware of this of global social and environmental issues and how those have an impact internally and externally. And finally, international cooperation. I mean, there are quite a few of advocacy mechanisms and out there, such as the UN Global Compact, for example. There are some others, associations, etc., that can help companies move forward towards the implementation of the SDGs. So, Yeah, so basically, well, this is what I want to share with you. As I said before, I mean, the book has a more condensed version of this model, and I just want to briefly explain and introduce the model. This is under work. I mean, we are updating this model continuously with feedback from corporations and external stakeholders, and we are planning to release the next version soon. So you can contact me at connect@drisabelfranco.com. Else, if you like to find more about our publications or sustainability, corporate sustainability, you can find those at my website, drisabelfranco.com. Thank you. If you have any questions, happy to answer any questions you may have. Thanks. Let's see.
Thank you, Isabel. Thanks for providing a concise summary for that very large manuscript. So at this point, we don't have any questions, so if I can encourage you to send through any via the Q&A button. Well done to all our presenters this morning. You certainly didn't show any notice. We've got 68 people in the room right now. Isabel, so I noticed you made the point around one of the challenges is that businesses don't link the SDGs with their core business. And I wonder whether there's some way of broader promotion of the SDGs and encouraging, I think, as you said, sort of that stakeholders in the supply chain to get involved through displaying the logos, perhaps on your website or something like that. But is there any sort of requirement associated with showing certain SDG logos in regard to being compliant or being audited or anything like that?
No, not necessarily. I mean, this is a set of goals that can be adopted internally and externally. The stakeholders or corporations themselves, they can adopt that, but there is not a mandate. There is not an international mandate of putting the SDG logo on any CSR sustainability report. There are some companies that do that, so they are very good at, for example, and the GRI, for example, they already have an SDG reporting mechanism. There are some companies that proactively, actually, they have set up their own SDG framework, and somehow they've been able to report against X or Y SDGs, but there is not such international mandate. Obviously, the UN, they encourage corporations to make them visible and show which SDGs they are working towards. What is something that is very important is that the SDGs, each SDG has targets. So when companies, for example, find difficulties in identifying priorities and in setting up goals, look at those targets, right? Because they can give you an idea on how to convert those targets into objectives that they can easily achieve later, right? So they don't have to reinvent the wheel because you already have targets, and they can apply and somehow customize those to the local context in which they operate within. Yeah.
Thank you. We've got a couple more questions and a couple more minutes to cover them. So the first one's from Ashley McKinnon, and the question is, do you feel minerals companies engage in heavily promoted SRI tokenism, and will it require more government intervention to build real investments?
Well, I've seen specific cases of companies engaging in SRI, social responsible investing, and that's happening in the resource sector. Obviously, there is I've worked in various consultation, multi-stakeholder consultation roundtables in developing countries where Australian companies operate, in Africa and Latin America. And what I found is that, well, in Australia, I mean, regulations, the governance structure and the governance mechanisms are much more stronger. But in developing countries, they are very weak. So there is a lot of capacity building that is needed, for example, in terms of for the government. And there are companies that are actually trying to build that capacity at the corporate level in developing countries. I gave you the case of Angola, which is was the case that I was working with in Katoka. In Angola, there is the largest diamond mine site in Africa. And Katoka, what we found is that there were quite a few issues around corruption, and that came from the government. Even though in that particular case, if we are talking about government intervention, there's no way that the government can intervene, because they themselves, they lack capacity. So I mean, government supporting intervention is key, but if the government doesn't have the capacity and doesn't have the tools and to address specific issues, is a problem. So what is happening, and some of the recommendations of international organizations, is that we should bring third parties. So, for example, the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, and that was one of the recommendations I gave when I was leading the project in Angola. Bring a third party that is going to help you trace the roadmap for sustainable resource development in the long term, because sometimes the government itself, they are not accountable themselves. They have to bring someone else.
Thank you. A couple more questions coming through. We might only have time for one. What challenges would the companies face when measuring sustainable innovations in relation to SDGs?
The challenges you mentioned, is that?
Yeah, what challenges would companies face when measuring sustainable innovations in relation to SDGs?
Well, the main challenge is the mindset, because there are some companies, I mean, that still need to acknowledge there is something called sustainability and there is something called sustainable development goals, right? So that change starts from within. So they need to educate corporates, they need to educate themselves, employees, to be able to move forward. And that's the major challenge that we have found. But the thing with the challenge is, as I mentioned before, is because the company, usually they don't look at the core business. So they start spending money on CSR, on donations, more like corporate philanthropy, but they start to spend the money on things that are not aligned with the core business. Say, for example, a fashion retailer, they start spending money on education or something that is completely irrelevant from the core business. So start from the core business, look at your core business and see if you are, for example, and I saw that we documented that case in Japan. So it was this, I forgot the name of this is very well known, like soy sauce. And they were spending money, putting money on education. And I said, well, we put this money because, I mean, it's something that we have to do. But we said, look, you're working on soy. What are you doing? What is the work? Are you working directly with the farmers? I mean, with soy farmers. How do they benefit from this, from the business? So they start engaging with soy farmers. They are helping them developing social enterprises, and actually then they saw the value, right? That becoming sustainable is profitable, right? So that's the message, right? Look at the core business, and then from there, build a sustainability strategy around SDGs or around any objectives that are valuable for the company.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Franco, and to all our speakers from this Impacting Investing session. Apologies to Kate and Sue who had questions. Can I encourage you to post those questions directly to Isabel via the app? So